Hi everyone, I'm Megan Hall, and today we're going to talk about reframing learning disabilities, looking at neurodiversity and the strengths model. So just to give you a quick agenda of what this presentation is going to contain, first we have a tale of two Megans, examples of the student experience. Then we're going to look at three different definitions that are used by educators: learning disability, learning difference, and neurodiversity. After that, we'll reframe LD, specifically looking at the strengths model with a few learning differences, talking about what they are and what strengths people with those learning differences often have. Then we'll get into practical application, what we can do specifically to help students in our programs. Originally, this was a live presentation with some discussion. So instead of discussion, I'll say food for thought, things that you can think about while you are watching this presentation online. Then I end with what students had to say from some online forums for students with learning differences, and then I have resources for more information for you. So that's our agenda. Let's get started. The student experience, a tale of two Megans. Hi, I'm Megan, and I'm neurodivergent. That's a picture of my brain. Just kidding. So I'm not going to say exactly what my issue or label is. I don't think for me that's not really important. Just to give you a little bit of background though, sometimes I have difficult focusing. Other times I hyper-focus and I become obsessed with completing a task or learning something new. For example, I'm an author, and when I write a book, I write quite quickly, and I have sometimes some difficulties not writing a book when I'm in that mode. So that is a good example of hyper-focus. I can sometimes become agitated by repetitive noises, so I have some sensory processing difficulties. So if I'm in a meeting where there's something buzzing or beeping or whirring, like an overhead light goes out, it's really hard for me to sit there and concentrate and hear what else is going on in that meeting. I can also become overwhelmed by too many noises. So when a lot of people are talking, I basically hear and kind of process all their conversations at the same time. It can be difficult to filter things out. In a classroom setting, that can sometimes be an advantage where I can hear multiple students' conversations all at once, but sometimes in meetings it can be difficult. I also have some sensitivities to things like food and fabric. Again, those sensory input things. I can't touch like cotton balls or velvet. Like the idea of it it's making my hands crawl right now. And there are some other things too. Like as a kid, I had some difficulties with socialization. But the important thing for you to know about this is really none of these things affected my behavior or my grades as a child. So in third grade, I was labeled as different in terms of being gifted. Our school district had a gifted and talented, or a G&T program. So I had learning differences, but those, for the most part, because of how they manifested, they were seen as strengths. And many of them people didn't even really know about. It's not a humble brag. I just want to give some context. So, meet the other Megan. Just kidding. I Googled the name Megan and that picture popped up. I'm not going to show you her real picture, but I was placed in our gifted and talented program, and there was another Megan in my elementary school who really was struggling. It was a small school, so she was in classes with me quite a bit. Through those like 6 years. She had a lot of problems and trauma from her home life. I didn't know about that at that point, but I do now, being her friend like on social media and things like that. And she was diagnosed with ADHD, which at that time many people didn't know that much about. In third grade, our teacher duct taped Megan to her desk to keep her from fidgeting and disrupting the class. The teacher did not get in trouble for this at all. And in fact, I know for a fact that a couple years later did this same thing with another student. In fourth grade, our teacher in fourth grade built a barrier out of cardboard and placed Megan at a desk in the corner with this cardboard barrier in front of her desk. So basically, she ends up being about 5 feet away from the rest of us, and the barrier was supposed to help her concentrate. But you can imagine if you were that Megan, you can't see the board, you can't interact with your peers, you're not allowed to do group work, you're very, very isolated. By 5th grade, her parents moved her to a different school. And you can kind of understand why, given what she had gone through the previous few years. So why start this way? Because I really want to frame our conversation here with the fact that students come to us with a lifetime of experiences, both positive and negative. What they do in our classroom doesn't happen in a vacuum. So their experiences in life and in the education system inform how they learn and how they interact with us. And those are some things to kind of take into account when you're looking at a holistic approach to teaching. And the second reason I start this way is because both Megan and I have the same name. We were in the same town, in the same school, and we both had learning differences, but they manifested in 2 completely different ways. My issues with sensory processing and some other things were largely hidden. My interest and hyper-focus on books and reading kind of made me look like an ideal student at that point. Invisible disabilities. Both of my parents also were teachers, and overall, I really had a positive experience in the education system until I got to college. And then I was really challenged for kind of the first time. I started to struggle with some of those social issues, I was in a different state with people I didn't know. I started having some problems with social anxiety and mental health, and I really didn't know where to go to for help or how to access college resources. In many ways, I don't even know that I would have identified that, my learning differences or my neurodiversity would have kind of been triggering a lot of those things. In contrast, the other Megan was really labeled quite differently. I want to say, what I ended up doing, I dropped out of school the first time I went. I was there for about 1.5 years, and then I dropped out. I ended up going to a community college, and that school had a lot of resources, and it was very easy to access them. And then I kind of took just a semester, figured out what I wanted to do, where I wanted to be, and ended up transferring to a great 4-year school where I finished out my bachelor's degree. But, that's also coming from a place where I had the money and the means and the health insurance to access very good, doctors and counseling support. I had parents who were both educators and who had both been to college. So you could see, even if somebody was in a similar situation to myself, that they might not have that same experience. So I just kind of want to say that those are some things that, we can think about with our students. But the other Megan was labeled quite differently. And when I hooked back up with her on social media, and, friend requested her and all that, I realized, she really hated school. She dropped out in high school, which I did not know. But recently she passed her high school equivalency exam, and she started classes at a community college in the state where she now lives, and she's becoming a nurse. But when I saw that, I couldn't help but wonder, how would her experiences as a child affect her feelings about education as an adult? Would she ask for ADA accommodations or look for help if or when she needs it? Will she feel awkward or embarrassed talking to her professors about her needs? What could I do to help a student like Megan feel comfortable and become more likely to persist and succeed? Now, again, in the live presentation, we had some discussion about this, but basically, my my suspicion is that she would be very hesitant to get those ADA accommodations, and I don't feel comfortable enough to ask her. But I would presume that possibly she would be hesitant to get those accommodations because in the past, she has been labeled and treated differently because of her diagnosis. And because she's neurodivergent or because she has a learning difference, she's been seen as kind of other, right? So if she then encounters a problem, would she, based on her experiences as a child, would she feel comfortable talking to her professors about her needs? I don't know, because I feel like, looking back, that our education system failed her, that she was treated harshly and cruelly as a child, and as a teenager pretty much ignored until she just gave up and dropped out. And now she's trying again as an adult, but she has all of that in the back of her mind, right? So I'm going to get into, in practical application, what we can do to help students like this, but I hope that this gives you a little bit of context for some of the people that are coming into our classes. So, what are our 3 definitions? Well, I've been using some of these terms, so let's get into what they actually are and what they mean. Learning disability is defined as a condition giving rise to difficulties in acquiring knowledge and skills to the level expected of those the same age, especially when not associated with a physical handicap. Now, I hate this definition, but I think that the key here is this last word, that when we frame things in terms of being learning disabilities, we look at them as being a handicap. So we only look at the difficulties rather than some of the strengths. So, for example, we talked about the other Megan having ADHD. In terms of learning disability mindset, a person with ADHD is inattentive, easily distracted, unorganized. They don't listen. They make rash decisions. They rush through tasks. If they have the hyperactivity part, which many people don't, many people have just ADD. But if they do have hyperactivity, they might have difficulty sitting still. And sometimes it's combined, where there's symptoms of multiple things going on kind of at once. And, many times, too, this is framed in terms of pedagogy, teaching children. We're looking at things in terms of andragogy, teaching adults, but sometimes ADD does not manifest itself in these very, kind of visible ways in adults as it does with children. So that's something to kind of think about as well. So learning differences is our second definition. The term learning differences refers to the diverse ways that students learn, and you'll notice this word all, and the rates at which they learn. The learning differences model considers the whole individual, including learning motivators, aspirations, interests, experience, and cultural background, and individual student strengths and needs. I love this little picture here. ADD is not a disability, it's a different ability. So when you take into account the learning differences mindset, if you go into teaching students who maybe have accommodations or don't, but they're showing some signs that they're maybe neurodivergent, learning differences says, it's not bad, it's just different. You prefer to eat watermelon and I don't eat any kind of melon because I don't like that. It's not necessarily bad, but I like apples and oranges and bananas. Right? But if you want to eat watermelon, man, go ahead, do it, go for it. I think that's kind of how learning differences, when you look at things from that perspective, that's basically what it's asking you to do, to think about the holistic approach, the whole individual, and to see their differences as just that, as differences, as opposed to a disability or handicap, which is something that, dis means not, right? So not an ability, an inability, or a handicap, something that's holding them back, rather than something that's just different. Neurodiversity kind of takes that same concept one step further. So it's kind of like when we have discussions at our school about equity and equality. Essentially, neurodiversity looks at the variation in all human cognitive function, which I see now on this graph is spelled wrong, but it says basically no one type of brain function is right or best. So there is really no normal, and if you know somebody who you think is normal, they're either very boring or they're hiding something, because no individual that I've ever met has been 100% normal. And that's basically what neurodiversity says, celebrating the differences in neurocognitive functions that takes into account other forms of diversity. So looking at equality and inclusion for everyone. So when you take that into account, when you look at something like ADHD, you start thinking about the strengths of ADHD, because if people without it are not the right or the best, what do people with ADHD bring to the table? Many of them, instead of saying, they're impulsive, that's a negative connotation, willing to take risks, spontaneous, adaptable. Many people with ADHD have a great sense of humor. They sometimes have hyperfocus. If they have that hyperactivity, they're quite energetic. So all of those are strengths that, by the way, a lot of, think about a company like, Microsoft or Google, where they're trying to be risk takers and be on the edge of technology, and adapt to new circumstances and have this high energy environment. These are a lot of the qualities that employers are looking for, right? And they can also be an asset in the classroom as well. So why might it be helpful to use terms like learning differences and neurodiverse instead of the old language of disability? I love this picture here in the middle, because I feel like this kind of just says it all. Inclusive language matters. And it really is important that we embrace the definitions and not just the words. So if we use neurodiversity or learning difference just as a synonym for a learning disability, but we don't change our mindset about what that actually means or think about the strengths model that we're going to talk about in a moment, then it's like performative equality or equity. It doesn't mean anything. And you start saying things like, well, it needs to be person-centered language, like an individual on the autism spectrum or an individual with autism. And that's okay to have person-centered language. But if you're concerned about things like person-centered language and using just the right word, but you still have the kind of intrinsic biases that came along with the old language, then it doesn't mean anything, and it's not going to transform how you teach or how you reach students. And I will say too that it can take a while to make that cognitive change. It's not a perfect A to B line, but I encourage you to kind of rethink things. So let's reframe LD, going from learning disability to learning difference. What are some of the strengths of dyslexia when we look at neurodiversity? Now, I will say that not all people have these strengths, but just like not all people have some of the trials or the struggles or some of the deficits that come along with these learning differences. In this case, here are two individuals, Richard Branson and Barbara Cochran, who have identified as having dyslexia. So Though children with dyslexia experience difficulties in processing the written language, they are often bright, creative, talented individuals. Strengths may include mechanical aptitude, artistic ability, musical gifts, athletic prowess. A lot of times I've found that students don't maybe do well in the classroom, and so they find other areas where they do succeed. Students may also have evidence of advanced social skills, talents in other areas like computers, technology, science, math, and they also tend to have great leadership qualities and the ability to see the big picture. So many studies have been done that show approximately 25% of CEOs have dyslexia. Now, I want to say that the thing about dyslexia is that many people with dyslexia are more likely to have difficulties with the law and to be in jail or to be imprisoned for breaking the law. They're also more likely to be managers, presidents of companies, and CEOs. And I think that much of that says a lot about our education system. So do we help these students and see their potential and see their strengths and help them to capitalize on those strengths? Or do we kind of give up on them and just tend to see their disability, their deficit, their handicap, like all of those kind of things? Reframing the way that you look at this and looking at things through the model of neurodiversity really can make a difference. So let's talk about dyscalculia, the strengths model there. Bill Gates, Henry Winkler, known as the Fonz, but he's also a writer, producer, director, a few people with dyscalculia. Dyscalculia affects a person's ability to process numbers and basic arithmetic functions. So many people will say, like, it's like dyslexia, but math. So strengths of these individuals can include heightened abilities in creative and strategic thinking. People with dyscalculia often see situations holistically. So again, much like people with dyslexia, seeing the big picture and enabling them to focus on important elements of the whole rather than the minor details. In terms of practical abilities, many people with dyscalculia are fast problem solvers, think outside the box, do well with hands-on practical skills, and they often have exceptional language skills and excel at reading and writing. So again, lots of strengths there for those students to work with. So reframing NVLD. That's Chris Rock, individual who has said that he has been diagnosed with NVLD. Nonverbal learning disabilities impact the ability to learn from and use nonverbal information. So people who are diagnosed with NVLD often have differences in how they pick up on body language, social cues, implied meaning, all of those nonverbal portions of communication. In contrast, they often have excellent verbal memory and possess a large store of information, a well-developed vocabulary. Students with NVLD have trouble understanding the big picture, but they typically have very strong abilities identifying smaller details. So I know a few people who were diagnosed with this as children, and now they're editors and proofreaders because they can pick out those really small difficulties. A few people also who are computer programmers because, again, they're looking at code and they're looking at those small details and problems and bugs in code and things like that. Many have great attention to detail and a strong rote memory, and they often have strong reading skills, outpacing their peers. Reframing autism, the strengths model. Jerry Seinfeld and Anthony Hopkins. Sir Anthony Hopkins, sorry. So, autism spectrum disorder refers to a broad range of conditions characterized by challenges with social skills, repetitive behaviors, speech, and nonverbal communication. And, the definitions for autism have changed recently. At one point, it included Asperger's. At another point, pervasive developmental disorder was kind of separated out to have a little bit more of a clear definition. So this is kind of the accepted definition for right now, but you might have heard other terms besides this in the past. But individuals with autism can display a range of strengths and abilities directly related to their diagnosis. So many of them are able to read at a very early age, memorize and learn information quite quickly. This is called hyperlexia in terms of language, like almost the opposite of dyslexia. And I know someone, for example, who is on the autism spectrum and was reading at the age of 2, was writing short stories and plays by the age of 5 or 6. Some excel in logic, areas of science and mathematics. Others may have different special interests, including language, reading, writing, history, etc. I think that there's a kind of pervasive stereotype of people on the autism spectrum that they're hyper logical, and many of them are, but not always. And I will say also that oftentimes, autism presents in women very differently than it does in men. So there are sometimes women with autism who are kind of like dreamy, imaginative, very interested in books, reading and writing and things like that. Now, there are sometimes men with that too, but yeah, it's a diagnosis that's often given more to men because of how it presents in women and because many doctors are not always aware of that. Many individuals are visual thinkers who have extraordinarily good memory, remembering facts for a long period of time, precise, detail-oriented. If you have a friend who is on the autism spectrum, ask them about their special interests because they will be able to talk for hours. I knew a guy one time whose special interest was like botany. That wasn't his job, but he could tell you just about anything about any plant that you ever wanted to know. I know someone else who is very interested in fantasy, and they can tell you everything about like every fantasy series, book, movie, game, all of that kind of thing. Some may have hyperfocus, particularly when it comes to something they're interested in. And many have the capability for alternate problem solving, rare sense of wonderment when discovering something new. Okay, so there are, a lot of different learning differences. I just kind of wanted to pull out for this presentation a few to show what the strengths model looks like. And sometimes knowing that can help us to help students. So what else can we do for practical application? How can we help neurodiverse students? Number 1, as I already said, change not only the words we use, but the way we conceptualize those words. So moving to more inclusive language, but also not just using the words in a performative way, but having the mindset and the mental framework of the mode that we're talking about. Considering the strengths model and talking to students about their strengths and not just their struggles or weaknesses. I have found that with many students, like the other Megan that I talked about at the beginning of this presentation, many of them have never been told what they're doing well. I've had students say they got a C on a paper, but they didn't know why. And they were told to go to the learning center or, in high school, the resource room or whatever the case may be. And really, people who focused so much on their weaknesses that they never asked them about their strengths. What do you feel like you're good in? What do you like? What do you enjoy? Open a dialogue by responding to accommodation notifications. This does a couple things. accommodations we typically get before school starts. Now, some of your students might send them out later, but many of them come before classes starts. It doesn't take too long to just say, hi, welcome to the class. Just wanted to let you know that I received these accommodations. Here's how they apply. So for example, in one class, I might say to somebody, we have, you have double time on tests and quiet test environment, but guess what? We don't have tests in this class that are timed, so you don't need to worry about that. But if there's anything else that comes up along the way that you think might require accommodations, just let me know and we can talk to our ADA office together. Or I see that you use a reader for texts. I actually have audio versions of our texts as well. So here are links to those audio versions, and you can use those or your reader, whatever's more comfortable for you. Sorry. So even just, taking that 2 minutes out to send an email, have a template, have things ready, and it can make them feel welcome, and it can open that dialogue. Do a survey or peer interview day one of class instead of just going over the syllabus. When you go over the syllabus day one of class, that is telling students, here are all the rules that you must obey. With andragogy, when we're teaching adults, students really want to be and should be included in their educational decisions. So having a survey or a peer interview can be a great way to do that instead of setting kind of a negative tone from day one. So what I do is I have students ask each other questions like, what do you think are strengths in this subject? What challenges might you encounter in class? I teach English, so I ask about their favorite book and their least favorite book. I write down all the favorites if I haven't read them before, and I try to read at least one or two. But that helps them too to kind of create a community and to have a little bit of a safe space to maybe say like, yeah, challenge is that I hate English but my strengths are that I like, reading poetry, whatever the case may be. So I typically at the end of that go around the room and have them say one thing that they learned about their partner, because there's some silly things on there too that they can share, like your favorite food or whatever. And then I collect them. And the thing about collecting them is that then I can identify the students who are very, very nervous about being there. So if somebody says, I hate English, I failed this class twice, I don't know what I'm doing wrong, I can maybe have a talk with that person pretty early on. Hey, do you know where the writing center is? Do you know where my office is? Here's my office hours. Do you want to, send me part of your paper before you send me the whole thing? What can I do to help you succeed? All of those kind of things. Typically, there's maybe one or two people the first day who are anxious, really anxious. And even having that conversation can help them persist into week 2 and motivate them a little bit. So one of the first things was inclusive language. So we're taking out the neurodiverse and just saying, how can we help all students? So number 5, identify pain points in your classroom. These are things that might be barriers that students could encounter. So if you think about a lesson or an interaction that could pose a challenge to people, maybe you teach math and you've been calling people up individually to do things on the board, and you've noticed that some of them don't want to do that and that they're kind of too anxious to do that in front of their peers. Maybe changing how you do that and have everybody at the board at the same time. Or maybe you have group work and you've been forcing people into groups, and maybe 1 or 2 people are really, really introverted and maybe they would do better just working on their own. Those are some things that we can kind of think about. What are pain points where I can take that barrier away and make them feel more comfortable? Give information in multiple formats where available. So if you're doing a PowerPoint, having a printout, having an outline of notes so that students can kind of follow along. Giving a video supplement, this is something that I do on Blackboard. So I'll send out an announcement after class. Hey, don't forget, here's the homework coming up. I know I explained X concept, but if you kind of didn't get it or you want a refresher, here's a 5-minute YouTube video. The video supplements can really help kinesthetic learners and people who learn through doing and movement. And things like printouts or an outline can help reader-writer learners. Audio versions of text, if they are available, I know sometimes they might not be, but there are companies that have audio versions of text. Sometimes they're meant for people who are have a vision impairment, people who are blind or things like that, but they can be beneficial for others as well. I have students who like to listen and read along at the same time just because that's how they learn better. And I have some who like to listen because they're very busy. So again, when you look at universal course design, it meets the needs of all students, not just those with learning differences. Give an outline or overview each class period. So this is, again, I hear a lot of people say like, oh, I don't have time to do trauma-informed teaching techniques or to try to fix everything and do universal course design for all my classes. It can just be really small things. I did this morning in my morning class. It took about 45 seconds. I just wrote on the board, hey guys, here's our agenda for today, kind of like I did in this presentation. First, we're going to do this, and that'll take about 20 minutes. Then we're going to do this, and that'll take 30 minutes, and then we're going to wrap up with this. The other reason that this helps is if you think about somebody like Megan that we talked about earlier who has ADHD, they can try to focus on a mini lecture for 20 minutes if they know that they're going to have group work right after that. Or if you say, look, we're going to do some problem solving and then I'm going to go over those answers. Well, they might be like nervous if they just are given a set of problems and thinking that that's what they're going to be doing the whole class, right? So it helps people know what to expect. Chunking information. I kind of tried to do that with this presentation a bit. Normally something this long I would break up into 2 or 3 presentations. For our purposes today, I did not. But having just multiple title slides, again, something that's pretty easy to do on a PowerPoint to chunk that information so that people can say, oh, okay, now we're talking about this subject. Now we're talking about that subject. Using smaller, low-stakes assignments to build confidence and mastery. This can also include breaking larger projects down into smaller steps. There are a number of classes on our campus where people are still doing like just one midterm and one final. The difficulty there is that students don't know what their grade is for 8 weeks, and then by the time they know they need help, it's almost too late. If they mess up on one big test, they're kind of done. And lower stakes assignments, whether they're in class or whether they're for homework, they can really build confidence and mastery. I love this little thing of like, we didn't hit the bullseye at all, and then we kind of got around the bullseye, and then we got right there in the center. Having smaller assignments where you can give feedback and say, look, here's what you still need to work on, and for the test, this part you missed, but that's going to be on the test again, so make sure you study that. Invaluable. It really can help. And for people who are coming from a background where they never knew their strengths or they were never told that they were good at anything, those low stakes assignments help them feel confident and know that they can do it. Reconsider timed tests. I know that this is not possible for all of you listening, but many students, as I described myself before, hidden learning differences and timed tests or in-class assignments can add undue stress and pressure. So even for people who have accommodations that are, double time, this can still be the case. And I would just encourage people to think about what they want to assess. Do you want to know whether the student has learned the information or whether they can recall it quickly? Because I will tell you that the thing about a lot of these learning differences is that the neurological cognitive processing just works differently. And for example, I know I have a relative who is brilliant, like really brilliant, but they will not, during family gatherings, play any games where there's anything timed. So if we have like trivia game with like a timer, they won't play that. But they can explain to you, you know, complex theories about just about any subject you want, whether that's like, you know, theoretical physics or whether that has to do with like literature. Cognitive processing time is not the same as intelligence, and time tests sometimes test for the wrong thing. They're testing often for quick recall rather than true knowledge of the subject. So that's just something to kind of take into consideration. A couple other things. Some neurodiverse students may exhibit behavioral issues. If they do in your classroom, you know, if it's possible and it doesn't involve like an altercation with another student, something like that, speak to them about these issues discreetly or in private. And before you correct their behavior, listen to their reasons for exhibiting this. You know, again, I think this is valuable even with pedagogy, but we're talking about andragogy and we are teaching adults. Asking an adult why they're behaving a certain way, you know, and even sometimes because they're learning difference, they might not know why, but it gets them thinking about, you know, it gets metacognition going. So they're thinking about how they think and how they behave and why they're behaving or thinking the way that they are. You know, even something like, hey, I noticed you missed the last 4 classes. What's going on? Or you're I had a student where he was shouting out questions in class that really seemingly had nothing to do with what we were talking about. So I talked to him after class and he was like, oh, but miss, you mentioned this like 2 weeks ago and I had a question about it, but I forgot to ask. And then also you said this and I was wondering about that. And I said, well, what if instead of shouting them out in class, what if you wrote them all down every time you have a question like that? That doesn't relate directly to what I'm talking about. And if you write them all down, you can come up after class and then we can go over them. Well, that was a really great strategy for him. And again, it didn't take that much extra time. It was maybe 3 or 4 minutes after class to answer some questions, some of which really were relevant. It just that with the way that I think, I didn't see the connection, even though he did. So, yeah, again, talking to students and having open communication. Send positive messages via email or Starfish to encourage performance, even for small victories. If you have somebody who is failing and now they're getting a D, send them a thing on Starfish. Hey, great performance this week. Glad you got that homework in. It looked really good. Or, you know, I was really glad to see you participating in class today. Thanks for your contributions. We talked about somebody like the other Megan. I know that at least in elementary school, she did not get hardly one positive thing said to her. It was negative messages over and over and over. Something like that really can make a difference. And I always say that my perfect student is a motivated student. I think this is something, you know, you can't fix a student's motivation completely, but this is something that can help to motivate a student. So connect with Starfish. Practice trauma-informed teaching. Oftentimes, trauma mimics learning differences. So we have had other training on trauma-informed teaching, so I'm not going to go into that here. I do have additional resources for you, and for those of you getting this presentation sent to you in your email, those will be included in that. For those of you just watching this on YouTube, they're at the end of the video. But trauma research has shown that things like post-traumatic stress disorder or adverse childhood experiences, those ACEs. People who have been through those experiences often show signs of a learning difference that they may not actually have. And other times they do have both, but the trauma exacerbates the conditions. So, for example, I know someone who at one point was in an abusive relationship, and they had really suffered through some trauma. And they said to me, I just looked at the page one day of the book I was reading, and I could not read it. The words were swimming before my eyes. The letters were all jumbled up. And this person had never shown any signs of having anything close to dyslexia. And they were really experiencing symptoms of dyslexia because of the trauma. In other individuals, things, ADHD is often mistaken when it's actually response to adverse childhood experiences or post-traumatic stress disorder. So that's just something to I encourage people to kind of educate themselves about and to be aware of. And again, some of the trauma-informed techniques are not things that take up a lot of time or energy, but can really make a difference in the classroom. So those are 13 different things that you can do in practical terms to help your students. So some food for thought, reframing the other Megan. Let's look at her now through the strengths model. So Megan has ADHD, and she had traumatic experiences in school as a child, and now she's taking courses to become a nurse. Megan's in your class. She discloses her neurodivergence to you, and she asks what she can do to be successful. How would understanding the strengths model help her to succeed? Well, I think, to answer my own questions, I think if you have an understanding of the strengths model, you could also maybe show her some of the strengths of ADHD and talk to her about how, I know that you're worried, but people with this are often very persistent. This is some of your strengths, and ask her, what are some of your strengths? Where else in life besides school have you been persistent? Have you been successful? Have you been willing to take risks, right? And then kind of talk to her about maybe some of the ways that she can capitalize on those. If you have a lot of energy, learn through doing. Try to get an internship in your field. If you're, trying to become a nurse, could you get a job in home health care where you're kind of learning on the job instead of possibly if she has a different job, I don't know. Or in the classroom, I know somebody who has this. They're very energetic. Pace around when you're studying. Take the book and walk. Look at videos where they're doing hands-on things, or they have, a video explanation of it. Have maybe a creative project in your class, as opposed to where they can maybe choose. Maybe students have a choice. Do they want to do a presentation or an informative poster or a paper, or whatever the case may be? So understanding the strengths model can help you look at Megan in a more positive light, and maybe can help her think about her strengths and how she can use those to succeed in class. How might a positive message through Starfish affect her mindset? Well, if she gets a positive message, she's like, hey, I belong here. I belong in college, and I'm doing well, and my professor thinks that I did a good job today. They might even think something like, my professor likes me. No teacher has ever liked me before. I feel like all teachers hate me. And that, again, it can really be motivating and can really help. Other strategies to make her feel more welcome. Really easy to do the accommodations letter, right? We've gotten the accommodations, shoot her an email and say, I got these, just wanted to let you know, and here's how they apply to my class. make sure that, for not just Megan, but for all your students, you have like an outline of the day, or a printout of your notes, giving that information in a couple different formats. If you have a graph, showing it in a bar. Some people read a bar graph more easily than a pie chart or a line graph, right? Even that can kind of be helpful. Having that student survey on day one, making sure that you don't have tests that are timed, having something to break down an assignment into steps. I used to just give a paper like, hey, here's your paper, it's due in 2 weeks. For some of my courses, and now I make sure I have checkpoints for that paper. Hey, we're going to work on just the introduction instead of just you're going to type for 2 weeks and I'm going to walk around and help you, or whatever the case may be. We're going to have a checkpoint where it's just your introduction and your thesis statement, and then we're going to have a checkpoint for your first 2 body paragraphs. Then we're going to have a checkpoint where you show me your resources. All of those kind of things could help her feel like, okay, well, I did the introduction of the paper. Maybe now I can do the whole thing. And giving her feedback along the way so she knows what she still might need to work on, but also what she's doing well. So that's kind of it from me. I went into Reddit and asked some people there in various communities for people with learning differences and neurodiverse communities. And I asked, what is one thing that you would want teachers to know that you think I should communicate to other people that I work with? So here's what they had to say. Be willing to work with neurodivergent students. I've had teachers who basically refuse to acknowledge me or my accommodations. Yes, I need them, even in an online class. It may seem obvious, but I've even had things from the ADA office where, like, it's a new technology that I have to use. Just take, 10, 15 minutes to talk to Susanna or whoever might be in that office and just say, hey, I want to make sure that I'm using this correctly. Or, hey, I have a video that doesn't have captions. Do you know how I can get captions for that video? Or, hey, I have a student who has a need for a screen reader, but I'm wondering if maybe an audio text would work better for them. And they seem to agree. Where do you know of any place that I can get them? But making sure, first and foremost, students have the accommodations they need. Oh, I want to say, too, this includes technology. I know someone, for example, this doesn't have really to do with learning differences, but I know someone who has type 1 diabetes, and her phone is connected to her port directly, and at one point a teacher tried to rip her port off of her, thinking that it was like an additional cell phone or something that she was messing with, and she had another substitute who tried to collect all of the students' cell phones at the beginning of class, and she was sent to the principal for not giving the substitute her phone. And this just is just a little bit of education that sometimes students do need that technology. I have some who need their phone because they're reading on their phone and they have to be able to make the text bigger, or they read better on a phone or a tablet than they do on paper, or they need to take notes on a laptop as opposed to handwriting them, right? So yeah, making sure that they get that. My accommodations are for extensions on assignments. Extensions do not equal being lazy. Sometimes it just takes time for us to reach where you want us to be. Again, are we testing for what they know or how quickly they can recall it? Sorry for some stuff being cut off here. Connect them to whatever office you have that deals with support. I had special ed services from 2nd grade until 12th. I didn't know my diagnosis until I was an adult. It was difficult in college not knowing what was different about my brain or what I could do to help myself. So saying, like, this is a person where if you make a quick announcement the first day of class and maybe even the second or third, hey, if you had an IEP or a 504 plan in high school, we have accommodations for college as well. the ADA office, here's what that stands for, here's what that means, here's how they help you, and talking to you about how you cannot do accommodations retroactively, because a lot of students don't know that. It also helps to give them a list of other support. If you need a tutor in high school, it costs you money typically. Many of our students don't know that we have free tutoring. There are tutors for free, in person and online. You can access them just about any time. That can really help. And again, it helps all students, right? Teachers need to be aware of situations where their students might be put on the spot or panic-stricken. Anxiety worsens my learning difference. And we have somebody here standing up at the board while people watch her, right? Again, that idea that that's a barrier and an impediment, and maybe we could take it out to make life easier for them and help them learn. I've literally walked out of classes where people have required us to do work on the board in front of everyone. Time has not blunted painful childhood memories of failing. This kind of is like the first one, but again, shows that people are coming into our classroom with all of these experiences and these life events that really, shaped how they think about themselves and how they learn. Don't post people's grades or progress or talk about them. I had a professor who passed out exams from worst to best. I cried for an hour and then dropped the class. So, dividing people up by how they do, and obviously, this professor violated FERPA and could be fired for that. But I think sometimes that might even happen in a classroom by accident, like, hey, you did really well on that paper. Oh, but you need to work on such and such, and one or two people overhear it, and then you've got somebody who's upset that you were kind of talking about their performance. So just be aware of that. Outlines and organized lectures really help. If a teacher just talks, it's difficult for me to follow and know how I should take notes. If you have, a learning difference where it makes kind of difficult for you to organize information, it's even more difficult with a professor who has a lecture that's kind of all over the place, or they just come in and talk. So again, it might even seem to you as the professor that it's organized, but having an outline that they can fill in, or giving here's our agenda for the day, or having those notes for that go with the PowerPoint, all of those really can help. And it helps them when they're studying too. This is our last one. I had a professor who told us the first day we would be using the book to teach ourselves. What is my tuition paying for? I cannot teach myself. That's why I'm here. Immediately made me feel like I didn't belong there. I think that this is probably somebody who the professor wanted to flip the classroom, but they use the language, you're going to teach yourself, and then in class we're going to do activities. And I think that if you can kind of explain to students what flipping the classroom is and how it saves some class time so that you can go over the difficult concepts and really teach it to them, that would help. But yeah, I could see how for somebody that would be quite frustrating and confusing. I wish teachers would be specific about what material is necessary, not just for the test, but real life. So much of college classes focus on theory. I realize that's important, but as a neurodiverse person, I value practicality. If things are practical, I'm more likely to remember and learn them. I feel like this is me with math. I actually do quite well with math. I never thought that I did in school, in high school and then in college, because I didn't care about it because I didn't understand the practical application. And then I did not do well in pre-calculus in college. And instead of doing calculus, I took psychology statistics. And that class made total sense to me because it had an application that I was interested in. So even, one sentence or two, here's why this matters. Here's the so what. Here's how you might use this in life. Or even if you don't, here's why it's important just to know as a piece of knowledge. Please don't make examples out of students, especially dividing us into gifted and struggling. It reinforces the sense that some of us are successes and some of us are failures. Yeah, again, looking at that as a disability model as opposed to the neurodiverse model and looking at people's strengths. Again, sorry for this being cut off. I might be failing, but that doesn't mean I'm not trying. Talk to me, ask me how I'm doing, ask me how I feel. Having those conversations can be difficult, and if a student isn't trying, maybe there's a reason for that too. But when they are trying, just talking to them and seeing how you can support them, or even, how they're feeling and if they're going to persist, or maybe even if they're going to try again next term with you or with somebody else. But having that open communication really can make a difference. So that's what students had to say. I think you can see from a lot of those the pain that many of them are carrying and the difficulties that they're coming into with stigma and bias when they enter our classroom, not knowing if we're going to support them or care about them as individuals or help them to succeed in the ways that are best for them. So I hope that this kind of gave you a good overview about the strengths model and some learning differences and some of the strengths to those differences and how we can better support our students here at our school. Here are some links for more information. Even if you can't grab these things to look up specific learning differences, ldonline.org is a great resource. They also have some videos here on YouTube about the strengths model. There's information about trauma and learning differences, and also neurodiversity and universal course design. So how to design a lesson or redesign a lesson or design a course or redesign a course, keeping universal design elements in mind to reach all students and to take down barriers, even for students who may not have learning differences or may not know that they have learning differences. So that's it, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. And if you work with me, you can ask me questions anytime. And if you don't, you can put them in the comments. Have a great day.